When I read about the golden calf, I used to be like, those idiots worshipping a golden calf? How stupid is that? This was followed not long after with, I'm not going to be worshipping any baby cows, gold or otherwise, so who cares, right? It took me quite a long while to see things in a different light. I'm slow that way. But if you want to see it my way, and who wouldn't want that, right? Come with me on a voyage through the text. The voyage starts with a question. Why were the Jewish people enslaved in Egypt? After the war between the kings, God promises Abraham that he will be rewarded. Abraham believes him, and everything is hunky-dory. But then God adds, I am the Lord that brought you out of Ur-Kasdim to give you this land to possess it. By the way, Ur-Kasdim means destroyers of light. God is saying he brought Abraham out of a world that destroyed opportunity. And how does Abraham reply? He basically says, prove it. Suddenly, God's stated promise isn't enough. But why not? What changed? I think the problem is that Abraham thought of himself as the actor. He thought he was responsible for his own success. He couldn't quite accept God taking credit for taking him out of Ur-Kasdim. It is entirely understandable. We like to think of ourselves as actors in our own lives. God's response to Abraham is pretty hardcore. Abraham will live a long life and die in peace, but his descendants will suffer exile and pain before they return to the land, and the text suggests they will be driven apart and only experience redemption after a period of smoke and furnaces and unprecedented darkness. By making the Jewish people helpless and then rescuing them, they will learn, without a doubt, that God rescued them, that he took them from darkness. Then they will finally be able to limit their own egos and realize their divine mission. So, Joseph makes Pharaoh into the most powerful man ever, a man who thinks he's a god, and the family goes to Egypt, and they get enslaved, and they are weakened and beat up and helpless, and they come out like insects, unable to fight back or defend themselves, and then God rescues them and brings them across the sea, and they recognize that God brought them out of Egypt. All done, right? Well, not quite. Soon afterward, Moshe's business trip up the mountain takes a little longer than expected. The people freak out and make a golden calf and worship it. What's up with that, right? Well, the actual name of the calf is Egel Masecha. Egel is a young cow, which is important, and Masecha means something like amalgamated. This is also, you guessed it, important. If we go back to our symbolism of offerings, a cow represents a nation. A young cow then represents a young nation, and gold represents divinity, and the thing is fashioned from the people's earrings. It's how they communicate with one another. Amalgamating these earrings together literally embodies the community. Taken all together, the people have made a god of themselves. They are worshiping the power of their own crowd. When they say, this is your God who brought you out of Egypt, they are doing exactly what Abraham did. They are making themselves the actor in their exodus from a land that destroyed opportunity. By the way, this idea of self-worship is everywhere in the story. The people play when they worship. If you're worshiping yourself, how better to serve your God than by playing? This is when God intercedes, when they are unquestionably worshiping themselves. When Moshe comes down the mountain, he tells Yehoshua, it isn't the sound of answering might, and it isn't the sound of answering defeat, but the sound of answering I hear. Move the comma, which isn't in the text itself, and it reads the sound of answering I hear. The people are speaking to themselves, and Moshe is telling Yehoshua to recognize it. Later, Moshe says the people have been pharaohed. They have been made like Pharaoh, seeing themselves as godlike. And when it comes time to punish them, Moshe commands, slay every man his brother, and every man his companion, and every man his neighbor. Why attack your brother, companion, and neighbor? Because Moshe is destroying the social cohesion that enabled the nation to worship itself. Moshe doesn't stop with punishment, of course. God wants to destroy us. After all, we just don't learn. But Moshe rebuilds a relationship with God. I'd love to talk about how he does this, but we'll have to skip that for now. What's critical is that before this, the Jewish people have no national punishments, unless we mistreated the widow and the orphan. But after this, national punishments abound. If we do not represent God, we suffer, showing God's presence. And if we do, we are rewarded, again, showing God's presence. We don't have to hearken to the Lord to witness his presence, but we are blessed or cursed based on how we embody his values. We become bellwethers of the divine. Why does this matter now? Well, God's promise to Abraham doesn't name the Egyptians as the oppressor. It promised 400 years of oppression, but the Egyptian slavery did not last 400 years. Isn't it possible that the smoke and furnaces and unprecedented darkness of God's covenant with Abraham were not only about Egypt? Isn't it possible they also referred to the Holocaust? Less than 75 years ago, we were helpless slaves in the face of those who saw themselves as supermen. We suffered unprecedented darkness and furnaces and smoke. And less than 70 years ago, we were rescued and we came to possess our promised land. At that time, we recognized the miracle of our salvation. In some way, we recognize the hand of God in our exodus from a land that destroyed light. But do we still? Do we still recognize that we are here but for the grace of God, or do we believe that we are our own salvation? Do we emphasize God's pride, or do we pat ourselves on the back, emphasizing our own innovation and might? Do we represent God's values of creation and investment in the timeless, or do we worship our own wisdom or chase after the values of other people's? Do we worship a calf of our own? The answers are unclear. In fact, I believe we are suspended between blessing and curse. Our economies grow, our farms are productive, but, as foretold in the curse of the Torah, we have skies of iron, which we honor and call Iron Dome. We have those who do not create, and we have those who do not invest in the timeless. But as a society, we often do both. We hang in the balance. We hang in the balance. But by learning the lessons of the calf, we can recognize God's place and tip the scales towards redemption. Shabbat Shalom.